Hello and welcome to DTV, your source for news and information about the Knox County Democratic Party. I'm Michael Davis, and I'll be your host for today's show on ReCode, which is the City of Knoxville's revision of its decades-old zoning code currently under planning and review by the Metropolitan Planning Commission. No matter where you live in the City of Knoxville, this is a big issue, and one that will affect everyone in the city, especially in terms of what our neighborhoods and housing types will look like over the years to come. With us today to discuss this process are two members of the Knox County Democratic Party Progressive Action Committee, Moira Connelly and LaKenya Middlebrook. Moira, LaKenya, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Well, so in full disclosure, everybody in the PAC has worked on this issue quite a bit, including Elizabeth Rowland, Allie Cohen, several others, myself even. So in the interest of full transparency, we all know a fair amount about this issue at this point. Who knew that we would all be studying things like zoning so intently for about a year or so ago. But we're glad that y'all are here with us today to talk about some of these issues that are going on. So Moira, I'd like to ask you first, just explain to our viewers what is zoning and what is the ReCode process.
First of all, in addition to all of our Progressive Action Committee members, we've also had a lot of advice given to us by other groups in the Knoxville area that are working on ReCode, some local builders, some other nonprofit organizations. So as we've been going through the ReCode process, we've been gathering a lot of information about this process that is a new opportunity for Knoxville because it hasn't been done in the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the most important reasons for people to get involved is that it's literally a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It can affect your property, it can affect where buildings are built, what they're used for, what they look like, and all of these issues are important to all of us in the city of Knoxville. And another thing to remember is that ReCode is city specific. It's not for the county, so it's just for the city of Knoxville. Right. And we also have to be careful about how we use our land, and that's one of the main things that zoning does is it divides it up for commercial purposes, residential, or industrial.
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned that this is definitely a city issue, but there are some ways that this affects the entire county and the region, just given how big Knoxville is.
And certainly because so many people who live in the county work and participate in activities in the city. So it definitely impacts everybody, but the city council members who are going to be listening to people's comments and stuff are certainly looking for that input from their constituents.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. LaKenya, so why does ReCode matter to our viewers?
Yeah, so as Moira was just commenting, zoning impacts essentially every aspect of our lives, whether we realize it or not, and it's really complicated and convoluted, and so a lot of people don't really delve deep into it. But when you look at the history of zoning, and especially, you look at the mid-20th century, zoning was a lot of times used to legally segregate racial groups and socioeconomic groups, and so the history of zoning can be very dark, but as like I said was stated, it can impact everything from where you build your business, how your home is situated and built, and so it has a very, very big impact on our communities, and so it, like I said, directly impacts us on a daily basis. And so but what we have really been focusing on from the Progressive Action Committee perspective is how zoning potentially impacts affordable housing in our community and making sure that we are not negatively impacting the most underserved and that we are equitable in our zoning policies.
Right. And you brought up a great point there about the, some of the traditions of racially segregating populations, and that term was usually referred to as racial redlining.
Right.
Correct? If any of our viewers are familiar with that term, that's what we're talking about. And
exactly.
It was a very prevalent process for decades, unfortunately, throughout not just Knoxville, but lots of cities.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And we're still feeling the impact of it today.
Definitely. Exactly. Following up on that, how could ReCode impact the availability of affordable housing? It's one of the things that I've noticed in all the meetings is that a lot of people will say, well, zoning doesn't have anything to do with the price of a house. It doesn't directly affect that. But what ways does it actually affect that?
Yeah, so there are several different ways, right? So you think about, for example, minimum lot size and how big a lot is. Usually the larger the lot, The larger the house, which can impact the cost of the house. Larger homes usually cost more. And also, the larger the lot size, the less available land there is to build housing on. And so it can directly impact it in that way. You think about accessory dwelling units, or what we commonly call ADUs, or what some people may call granny apartments or granny flats, right? So these give an opportunity for more diversity of income and family makeup in a community. It allows folks to age in place and can increase affordability in certain neighborhoods, right? We think about mixed use, which, if folks aren't familiar with that term, that a lot of times is just like it sounds, mixed use. So you may have commercial space and residential space kind of in the same area, and so that can allow for more affordable housing in an area. And then one of the things that raises a level of concern also when we're looking at the ReCode process is the availability and the opportunity to include duplexes and multifamily apartments into communities, right? So allowing the opportunity to increase density and make units available, because one of the things that drives cost is availability. And so if there are less units available, then the units become less affordable to the population.
Right. And just for both of you there are a lot of terminology that
Yes.
people have to learn with this. So going back to, a lot of people assume that multifamily is an understood term, but not necessarily. What we're talking about there is exactly what when we're talking a multifamily structure.
Particularly, from our point of view, we're talking about very small. We're not talking about big apartment. We're talking about 2 to 4 unit family housing is what we're looking for. Things that can blend in with the character of a standing community is kind of what we're looking at.
So that multifamily term could mean anything from 2 families all the way up to a high-rise apartment building.
Right. And a lot of times what a lot of people don't realize is that these units already exist in neighborhoods, but they blend in, and so we don't realize they're there. But people hear the term and they become concerned about what it means in their community, but a lot of times these units are already in your community.
Right. And as far as ADUs, the accessory dwelling unit, this can be not just a structure that's attached to an existing structure, the normal house that's on there, but also part of it, like built into it as well.
Exactly.
Right? And lots of people are looking at these for a lot of different purposes, and we'll get to that here in just a few minutes. But so that leads up to, what are y'all seeing about how the current draft of ReCode could affect affordable housing in particular?
So what LaKenya's done a nice job is sort of laying out the markers of things that we would be looking for to indicate sort of a zoning code that would promote affordable housing. So as we've gone through the draft that we currently have, we're seeing some of these things not there, and we're seeing some of them there. So some of the elements that we would like to see more of include some of what LaKenya was talking about in terms of minimum lot size. We are seeing some of the minimum lot sizes actually be increased from one zone that we currently have to a new zone.
So if you're looking at density, less lots on the same amount of land just means a little more availability of housing, therefore increasing availability.
Or even cost.
Right.
Because the smaller the lot size, the smaller your piece of land, then the smaller anything that's built on it is going to be.
Right.
So rather than requiring larger pieces of land for housing in different parts of the city, we want the lowest size lot, because then that would keep the housing price down.
Which increases density, which increases affordability.
Exactly, yeah. And we're also seeing restrictions on things like duplexes and multifamily construction, even very little ones. And the funny thing about duplexes, and LaKenya referred to it, is I like to say I think duplexes are already hiding in plain sight.
Right.
I think there are a lot of neighborhoods in Knoxville where if you walk around, there's a building, it might look like a traditional single family house, but if you look closely, you're like, oh, there's 2 doors and 2 addresses on this structure. It's actually a duplex, and you didn't even realize that it was there because it blends in so well. So, but unfortunately, we're seeing sort of restrictions and requirements for special use for duplexes in most sections of the city. We're also seeing a prohibition on the use of vinyl for a large percentage of exterior coating of development, and we don't see that as an aesthetic quality and we're about affordability, and vinyl has been shown to be in a very affordable housing material. So we are concerned about the limitation on vinyl as a use. There's also what we've been told with some of the consultants we've been working with, there are new types of vinyl on the market. So that as we go into ReCode, one of the things about it is these rules need to be updated, not just for use, but because the times have changed. Materials for building have changed and improved. Right. So if you didn't like the vinyl you saw 30 or 40 years ago, this is not the vinyl that's on the market right now.
Not your
current
vinyl.
That's exactly right. So we'd like to bring this up to people's attention to realize that vinyl is just not, terrible.
Yeah. I thought that was kind of a particularly interesting thing.
Yeah.
Such a very specific, very granular thing to have in something that's such a far-reaching and wide thing as the ReCode of Knoxville. So any ideas about where that even is coming from? Like, who's advocating for that? What are the reasons?
So aesthetics. Some people just prefer brick, and we have had some conversations with MPC, and we have found them to be responsive in our conversations, and they are open to comments, and that's one of the things we're hoping to do in this segment is give people the opportunity to make comments. So if they hear from people that vinyl's okay, then they may look at that again.
Okay.
Yeah. Some of the great things, and and I've got to give credit to MPC and all the professionals who've been working on ReCode. There's some really good things in ReCode too. And two of the things that we really laud and think promote affordability are the ADUs. These would be accessory dwelling units permitted in every zone of the city, and we consider that to be a good thing. Yes. And we're also seeing mixed use pretty much across the city, specifically on corridors, where you might be able to have an apartment above an artist studio or above a restaurant that people run or whatever, sort of back to those days of where people worked in the place where they also lived. So that kind of mixed use development promotes affordability and the integration of housing in other parts of the city.
Right. Yeah. And one thing about that as well, even on you may call it an aesthetic level, mixed use really contributes to the feel of a city in a lot of ways. Yeah. And I think lends a lot of a bigger city feel to some of those corridors, and something I think that's been expected but missing in some places in Knoxville, to where looks like we're going to remedy that in a large scale to have something that nearly everybody seems to be in favor of finally come along.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Moira, to follow up on that, how have people in Knoxville been responding to the new draft?
I think it's important to realize that zoning is an emotional issue because it affects things that are important to us, right? It affects our house, our property, our neighborhood. So it's really easy to get caught up in the passion around this. But I think that even as we do that, it's important to stop and step back and think about it's not just all about us or about my home or my neighborhood, but other people are involved here too.
Right.
So I think we're seeing, first of all, some people just very much looking at their own piece of the pie. And you can understand that, people work hard for what they get, but we're just encouraging people to step back and think about the long view and other people in our city as well. So we are seeing some pushback on some of these issues. So with ADUs, some people are saying that that's an assault on single resident parts of Knoxville, and that they don't want ADUs because they don't want increased density and they only want single family dwellings. And our response to that is twofold. One is that it can increase the value of a piece of property for the homeowner and sort of increase the ability for the homeowner to have an extra income revenue stream on their property. So we consider that sort of a homeowner's right to use their property as they want to. Additionally, and more importantly, we see it as a way to open up all of our wonderful neighborhoods in Knoxville to people who may not have previously been able to live there, and having some affordable options across the city to give people an opportunity to live in all our desirable parts of town is a great thing. The other thing we're seeing some pushback on is duplexes for some of the same reasons, but again with the duplexes, I really like what LaKenya is saying. I think people don't realize how much they're already in existence and really blending in with the character of a neighborhood, and that's what we would argue. And then the opposition to vinyl, we do think that MPC is going to reconsider some of that. Yeah. So that's some of the comments we've been getting back.
Okay. Back to the ADU thing is just because it seems to it's getting a lot of attention.
It is.
And I think our viewers will probably have a lot of questions about that. Isn't one of the things that could be beneficial about this is the so-called aging in place factor of that, and then also which was where, the idea being that someone may purchase a home, a larger home, later on in life want to downsize, and then if they have an accessory dwelling unit already on the property, they can move into that with possibly the intention of renting out the larger house to either someone else or having their adult children move back in, so that a family just kind of cycles through the same property in a way, almost like a little minor homestead within a city.
Yeah.
Also seems to be would be an attractive option for young adults in between high school jobs, college and jobs. Makes it a little easier to move back home when their end
when you have
is
your
on
own
the
space.
yes, a little detached, I'm sure. So what are people, have you heard anybody responding positively to that option, even when their first impression of the idea doesn't seem to sit well with them?
We have. And the other thing we really have heard positive comments about is the fact that ADUs, of course, are not required. This is optional.
Right.
So when people are saying that we're going to have ADUs across the city, I think an important thing to remember, and some of what people have been saying, is I don't have to do this. It's not a requirement. So the fact that I don't know that we would see every homeowner choose to make this step. So I think that's important to think. Another thing, just to back up for one sec, that I think it's important to think about ReCode is whatever you currently have stays. So we have heard from some people, well, I have X, Y, and Z. Are they going to come in and make me redo it? No. What you have on the ground currently
very important
stays, as we're talking about things that are in the future,
The common term that people will use a lot for that is grandfathered in. So, if unless there's some very wide variance or something like that, if it's been allowed, it will be able to remain.
And I think, to your point with regards to the ADUs and the opportunity to age in place, I think it's a very valid point when we look at the fact that our, population is living longer, and folks are very interested in staying in their communities and their homes. Families want to be close to their loved ones and their relatives, and it does give that opportunity for families to cycle through. In our family we call it the home house.
Right.
But it gives the opportunity for families who may not otherwise, whether it's a young adult who may not otherwise be able to afford to live in a certain neighborhood, to gain a foothold in that neighborhood and establish themselves, to have an opportunity to build some capital and some wealth, some credit, so that they could then transition to a home that would be more appropriate for them as they progress through life. But it's a wonderful opportunity for all stages of our community to be able to have housing that's affordable and live in communities that they're comfortable in.
Right. And a lot of the opposition I seem to have heard kind of gets swatted down by what a lot of people have seen in other cities, that if you have a certain kind of property, most people tend to not build another property on it that's going to detract. It usually fits right in, almost indistinguishably from it. And, the neighborhood may worry about, well, who are they going to let rent there? Well, it's probably much more of a concern for that homeowner, for that property owner, about who's renting and living there. And they want them to, fit into the neighborhood as much as anybody else, and they have the biggest interest in that. So it seems like those interests would allow the neighborhood character to be preserved on its own naturally. So that a lot of the fears that people have about what is this going to upend my neighborhood into a totally different thing, practically speaking, other cities that have allowed this don't seem to have that drastic of a difference.
Exactly.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. All right. So what is KCDP, the Progressive Action Committee, done to promote affordable housing options in ReCode?
Yes, so Progressive Action Committee has been very, very busy over the course of the last several months. Been kind of working through the ReCode process since about mid-year of 2017. So it's been a little over a year that they've been working on, that we've been working on this process. And so we have talked to members of the Metropolitan Planning Commission, which most people will know as MPC, their staff and members and other city officials. We've also, met with city council members, with the KCDP district meetings, letting folks know, and then other community groups, letting them know about the ReCode process. We have worked collaboratively with groups like NAACP, which, full disclosure, I'm also a part of NAACP and their housing committee, but worked with groups like NAACP and some other groups to educate ourselves on the issue, and then also to share information and to advocate around the issue. And so we've met with city officials along with NAACP and really discussed the fact that we had serious concerns that a lot of members of our community, and especially some of those most impacted, would not have an opportunity to participate in this process. And not long after that meeting, we saw the city partner with SEED, the Knoxville Area Urban League, and Central Hispano to make sure that they are engaging members of the community in the ReCode process, which is something that we're really grateful for, and we're hoping to see more community input. We have submitted official comments with regards to the ReCode process, and we will continue to submit comments as the process goes on. And we are also updating folks, hopefully through our social media, so you can follow the Progressive Action Committee's Facebook page and our newsletter and to see updates, and we'll continue to update folks and provide information as it becomes available through our social media also.
Okay. So following up on that a little bit, we've got there's a lot going on, there's a lot to study, there's a lot of different ways that people can get involved, but why is it important for people to care about this now? And for both of you, just on for wishing for the best for our city, why should people care so much about affordable housing if they feel like their housing has been affordable? They've had their options available to them that they can acquire, whether it be renting or buying. Why should people really care about this?
I think one of the things is we're seeing a lot of our citizens and residents in certain areas of town displaced. And I think that affects all of us because we all, pay taxes on services that everyone needs. So if we have some of our citizens not able to access the services they need, then sometimes that's putting them at greater risk of getting ill, and then if they end up on some kind of emergency room, then sometimes we all bear the burden of that. And I think that's, sort of the financial nuts and bolts part of it. I think the big reason is because we're all people. And I think we should care because we're all Knoxvillians, and we all want Knoxville to be a great place for everyone in Knoxville to live. And so I just think, if we can look at it citywide, there is room for everybody and there is a place for everybody. And I think if we all take some time, we can also make that happen in a way that will probably be satisfactory for almost everybody. And there are some ways that people can make some comments about, how they're feeling about how this process is going.
Right.
Yeah, and I think to that point, the real and simple fact of the matter is that our city is growing. That is a fact.
Right.
And as the city continues to grow, we want to make sure that we are equitable in our housing options. And while it may be that you can afford to find a place right now, whether it's rent or buy, as the city continues to grow and the population continues to increase, but the inventory of affordable housing does not increase, you may find that you can no longer afford to rent or to buy. And I think it may have been mentioned before that our zoning impacts just about every aspect of our lives, whether we think about it or not. And the more equitable our housing options are, the more diversity we see in our communities, the better resourced our schools are. And so if we want to have a well-prepared and a workforce, an attractive city that draws people who are going to contribute to this community, then we need to have housing that is affordable and accessible. If we think about the folks who make our cities run, our cities don't just run off of the folks who can afford to buy the house they want. They also, require folks who maybe make a minimum wage or make just above a minimum wage, kind of that missing middle that we talk about sometimes in the housing community. So we need to make sure that we are making housing affordable so that those folks can live and thrive and continue to contribute to our city.
Right. Great. Well, so how can viewers get involved at this point?
So one of the easiest ways is to actually go online and find two methods of involvement. And they are all listed at the Knoxville ReCode website. Okay. And so that's online, and there's a list of community meetings, so that's a great way to get involved.
And that website is?
Knoxville ReCode, or ReCode Knoxville.
.com.
.com, yeah, it's one of those.
KnoxvilleReCode.com.
Yeah, it's there. And online, you can make comments about your property. So I think we have a slide that shows one of the ways that you can make comments. And this is an example, and because I didn't want to put anyone's personal address up here, I chose Victor Ash Park. So this is actually a ReCode slide that would come up. If you go on there, you'll see a search box, and you put in an address, and then it's going to tell you on the left-hand side what the proposed zoning map is, and then on the right-hand side, it's going to show you the existing zoning map. And so that's going to lay out for you what the city is considering in terms of rules about the buildings and all the materials and the structures that can be put in those two areas. Now we have a second slide, and this goes, if you click on the legend for both the proposed and then the existing, that tells you what each of those areas means around the address that you've put in. So you can take a look at that and decide if you like the new, if you like the old, which you have comments and feelings about. And then at the up right, it says feedback. And so then you just click the tab that says produce feedback, and you can put in your comments. And the Metropolitan Planning Commission is collecting feedback from residents of Knoxville about what they think, and are seeking those actively. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's
And then in any meetings that we've got coming up, I've got a list of a few that are coming up very soon, people can also submit written comments, and they've stated that they are taking at least some notes about the verbal comments that happen at those meetings as well. So
Right.
you've got at least 3 distinct ways: online, written at the meetings, and verbal at the meetings. And and also, you know, if you want to come work with the PAC, of course, you can contact us, and we can kind of amplify those comments.
Exactly.
So, all right, any other ways that people can get involved in right now?
I think to continue to look at our Facebook page, the Knoxville Progressive Action Committee, some of the stuff, and we've had conversations with the Metropolitan Planning Commission about this, this is dense material, and we're not 100% sure that all the information is easily accessible on the MPC website. So where we are finding what we consider to be deficiencies, we are sort of creating our own documents and supplemental material to help people understand this process that we'll be posting on the Progressive Action Committee Facebook page. So as we continue to develop those.
All right, great.
Great.
So, LaKenya, what in the remaining time that we've got, what's the remaining timeline for ReCode?
Wow, so we need folks to get involved now.
Right.
The deadline for submitting comments on the current draft is September 13th, which is very, very soon. And so please, 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 please submit your comments. And then once comments are submitted, another draft of the ReCode, which will be the 3rd draft of ReCode and the 2nd draft of the map, will be released very soon. Probably around October. City Council, my understanding is, hopes to vote on the ReCode before the end of the year, or at least by the end of the year. So this process is moving along really, really quickly. It's kind of one of those, you know, slow moving and then it rolls.
Right.
And so we need folks to get involved as soon as possible.
Okay.
And then, you know, it's really important to remember that ReCode, this draft is something that's going to impact us for probably the next half a century.
Right.
And so it's really important to think about what we want our city to look like going forward, and really get engaged in this process and decide what the future of Knoxville will be.
Okay. So some upcoming meetings. There's a meeting in South Knoxville on September 10th at 6 p.m. and there's a planning workshop at 5:30 on September 20th. And lots to know about this, lots to get into here. If you want to check out that website, again, a correction there, it's ReCodeKnoxville.com. Go check it out. From the PAC, the KCDP Progressive Action Committee, Moira Connelly, LaKenya Middlebrook, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm Michael Davis, and thank you for watching DTV.